Hi, everybody. My name is Bridget Brobe. Today we are here with our new guest for the 6th episode of the Seniors and Money podcast. We're here with Sam Oubadia. Sam is an investment expert, and we got the beautiful chance to meet last year, May 2023, when we launched Scale Up for the first time to the public and an amazing audience that you were a part of. And after all was said and done, you came up to me and we got the chance to speak. And since then, we've kind of been keeping up a rapport over text and sometimes phone calls, and you've always maintained this beautiful curiosity of where we're at as a nonprofit and what we do. And I think we both can pretty much describe ourselves as money people. We love talking about money and financial literacy, but specifically the education part of it. So I'm very, very happy to have you here with us today and get this episode rolling. So would you mind, please, Sam, introducing yourself and your experiences and basically why we have you on today here as a guest?
All right. Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction.
Thanks.
As you mentioned, my name is Sam Oubadia. I've worked in investment management for probably at least 25 years now or more, and a lot of those years being abroad in Europe. And over time, I guess realizing the importance of financial literacy and particularly getting the message out to younger people, because as we'll probably discuss through our conversation, the younger you start, the better off you'll be in the long run. So I've worked, as I said, on the institutional side of investment management, both in Canada and in Europe, and now teaching at Concordia at John Molson School of Business and the Department of Finance, a course specifically on finance and investing.
That's great. That's great. And how long have you been teaching at Concordia for?
For about 3 years now.
For about 3 years. Okay,
Yeah.
This is a fairly new position.
Fairly new, although in a way it's getting back to, I did my Master's of Business Administration at Concordia.
Okay.
And so that's how life sometimes just works out. You end up back at some of the places you were.
Where you started.
Yes, where you started. So it's been a good experience for the past 3 years, yeah.
Honestly, that's the beauty of it all. Because for me, too, when it comes to this whole money thing, for me, it was a self-taught thing during the pandemic, pretty much exactly 3 years ago when it all started. I was stuck home, didn't have much to do, and I think all of us were kind of worried about finances. You know, we were getting the emergency fund from the government and all of that. So I really took the time to sit down and learn about finances in a way that my parents never really taught me. So that's interesting. And the next point actually now is to talk about why financial literacy is so important. So you have tremendous experience, and I think I'd like for you to start with your experiences in Europe. What did you do in Europe, and why is financial literacy so important to you?
Yeah, so in Europe, I was a fund manager on the institutional side, which basically means managing mutual funds for a large organization and for investors that were both retail and institutional investors. And I have to say, having worked there quite long, it was a great place to be living and a great place to learn. So I learned a lot there in the years that I spent in Europe. Eventually came back to Canada because I am born and raised here and my family was here, and also started working in investment management here in Montreal. And at that time, I had a lot of people, mainly friends, not necessarily clients, but friends of the family, friends of my wife, who would often come and ask questions about investment management, knowing what I did for a living. And so I was very happy to try and help them out. But at the same time, it made me realize that, you know, there's a lot of basic issues and things that are important to understand for people that they don't know. And, you know, I took these things for granted. A lot of these things, you know, I didn't learn myself either from school. I learned them from doing them on the job. And I realized, though, that, you know, there is a shortcoming in terms of education because I didn't learn these things in high school. People in general don't learn these things in high school. You don't, certainly once you pick a path of what you want to be doing in life, you won't necessarily learn them in university. And even myself, having done a master's in business administration, a lot of the things that I thought were very basic, very fundamental for people to be aware of when it comes to investing, I didn't learn those things in school. I learned those things from work experience. And so it made me aware that, you know, as much as I want to try and help people to become financially literate, there's a real, as I say, a shortcoming in our educational system that I think is trying to be more addressed now. At least I hope so.
Absolutely. And I think what you're mentioning allows me to highlight our differences here. I'm 25 years old. My parents are African, born and raised here, but basically I've always been in an immigrant household, right? And would you like to also speak about your own background? Where are you from? Were your parents established here?
Sure. No, both my parents were not originally from here.
Okay.
My mother was from Europe. My father from Middle East. And so in terms of yes, they did somehow stress, especially my father, stressed the importance of maybe not so much financial literacy, but the importance of saving and the importance of making sure you have money set aside for whatever events may come up in life, some that will come up and some that, the surprises, let me put it that way. So he stressed that. And sometimes not so subtle ways, if I can put it that way. And so I think that's what gave me somehow it was ingrained in me, whether I knew it or not, that
money was important.
Yes,
is important.
Yes, yeah.
I can say the same for myself, even though we have a pretty interesting and important age gap in the sense that my parents, too, did not necessarily teach me how to invest, or if anything, they're kind of, scared of investing. They're kind of scared of that part of things. They're not too privy to that kind of information or people around them who do the same. So the way that I understood how and why money is important is because of the stressors I saw them going through, in the sense that, like, hey, you have to have money for this. Like, look at the amount of food that we're bringing home. Look at the amount of hours we're working weekly. So for me, it kind of came at an angle of stress that I understood why money is so important, because I didn't want to feel like them or go through the things that they were going through as well. So from a young age, you kind of get those signals, and then you grow up, you make decisions about school, about life, about your career, and obviously you want to do something that really interests you, but you also want to make money. So I kind of had to, position myself in that realm and see what was going to be more fitting. But at the end of the day, I got what I got from them, but I realized that it just wasn't enough. Kind of like what you're saying, you got this amazing perspective through work and school and putting yourself through this education that otherwise, had you not done, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today, you and I.
Yeah, you raise a good point. Coming back to my father, I mentioned that he stressed saving. So he stressed saving, but not investing.
No, absolutely not. No investing.
And they're not the same. I can probably go as far as to say that my father never bought a stock in his life, actually. So that came from my own, let's say, knowledge and learning and school and so forth and exploring and that the investing side didn't come from my father.
Definitely not. I can surely say the same for me as well, which leads us to our next point, which is talking about why investing is saving. And I think it can scare a lot of people. I was definitely scared before I got started. I think, especially coming from I wouldn't say a place of being naive, but being very skeptical. My parents are very skeptical people in the sense that, should you always trust what the government says are jewels and, TFSAs and stuff like that? So for me, it was a scary introduction, and I had to use the school of YouTube to do that. YouTube is very helpful for people who are trying to learn whatever that they want to introduce themselves into. And I found people who looked like me that were trying to invest. I found people who were as young as me, just basically who had my profile. And I was freshly just enrolled into my bachelor's degree at that time. And I have a bachelor's in social work. I'm a social worker. And a lot of people ask me, what is a social worker doing talking about finance? And I always tell them, well, if there's one thing that happens with almost every community that I've served after doing my internship at the neurological hospital in Montreal here is that there was always a big question about money. Did we save enough? Do we have testaments? Do we have wills? Are we ready? Do we have a notary? Do we have enough money to take the taxi to even make it to the hospital? And you'll find that a lot of people are really kind of living under this line. So for me, social work, financial social work is a branch of its own. We talk about behaviors, we talk about consumership, we talk about so many things. So for me, branching those two together is something that I'm extremely passionate about. And investing, like we're mentioning here, is something that should start young, if you can anyway. So Sam, in your perspective, why is investing important?
Yeah, so you touched on a point there, and I think it goes into the insecurity about money and about what your situation will be down the road, whether that's 10 years, 20 years, so forth. Yeah. And you could read now, and this seems to be fairly common in the United States and Canada, about more and more situations where people find themselves reaching a certain age, say in their 50s or maybe a little bit older, and with very little to no savings, having made very little investments along the way. And I go as far as saying it's somewhat of a scary situation that so many people are finding themselves in this place by the time they reach 60 or 65 and they're not able to work. And those are the ones that, let's say, are healthy enough to work until 65. Very often you may not be, and you'll be forced to stop working at even a younger age, which can leave you in even a worse situation. So if you're, again, I'll use the word awareness, and if you're aware at a younger age, let's say if out of university even, and you can start to prepare for the future, for down the road, and, put yourself, your family, to be in a better situation by the time you reach a certain age. And maybe by that time you're already, you're married, you have children and so forth. And so that's kind of what I think I try to stress often with my students who are, between the ages of 20 and 25. And it's a tough message because I remember when somebody tried to, bring me that message when I was 25, you don't really think so much about when you're going to be.
You have enough time.
Exactly. So, why do I want to worry about that now? I mean, it's so far down the road. And yes, it is down the road. But I mean, again, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. And I think some people realize that. Some people, act on that. And so the more that do, the better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of educating them, financial literacy, and just putting themselves in the best position they can be for even what may seem to be such a long way down the road.
Absolutely. I think what I'm thinking about as you're mentioning all of this is that sometimes money is kind of like a personality trait in the sense that depending on how you grow up and depending on how you model your life or whatever, it will also kind of determine how you treat money in a sense that for me, I mean, and this is very subjective, I saw my parents go through all of what I said and it gave me those insecurities. It gave me that like wide-eyed, oh my God, what am I going to do too? So I guess that insecurity brought me to chase security younger than my peers did. And that's why I find myself here today caring so much about something very important that we can now delve into, which is called compound interest. Mm-hmm. What can you say about compound interest?
Yes, what apparently some people have referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. So yeah, I mean, compound interest is just the fact that, money grows at a certain rate, whatever that rate might be. And that, so if you start off with an investment, let's keep it simple, of even $10,000 one particular year. So on that particular year, assuming you'll make a certain rate of return on that, so then at the end of the year, you have a certain amount of wealth having saved up. But then the following year, your return is not just on your original $10,000, but on whatever you accumulated beyond that, after that first year, and so forth and so forth. So compounding over longer periods of time, which what investing is meant to be, is what leads you to be in such a better position down the road if you're disciplined about investing. And we can talk about what being disciplined means, but the idea of compounding is that it allows you to make returns upon your returns and so forth over as long a period of time as you're invested.
There you go, exactly. Yeah. And that's also why we relate to, seniors. When you start young and you hit a certain age, you realize, oh my God, like look at all this return. And you feel more comfortable wanting to retire. You feel more comfortable wanting to travel and do these different things that you planned during your career to finally settle down and do. So I'm hoping that the message is clear here. Mm-hmm. This is why investing is so important, specifically at a younger age. We could talk now about the types of investment accounts.
Sure.
Do you want to get started on that as a professor?
Yeah. Well, we can probably do a whole show on this.
Definitely.
But we'll try to, and I think we're mainly referring to different types of registered accounts.
Yes, and we could talk about the three most important ones here: the TFSA, the RRSP, and the RIF.
Right.
So and their benefits, of course.
Right. And now just to add in another little. There's a new one as of 2 years ago, which you might be familiar with, the First Home Savings Account.
Exactly, the FHSA. Yeah. There you go, yeah.
So, and I'll try to be brief with each of these because, as I said, there's a tendency that you can, with each one, there's a whole set of rules and regulations that, are very important that people should definitely make themselves familiar with if and when they open such an account.
And all of this, always do your research. That's always going to be the main point. Always do your research.
If you work with an advisor, if you work with an accountant, definitely,
take that time.
Take that time to understand these rules carefully. So the oldest one, which is the one that probably most Canadians are familiar with, is the RRSP, the Registered Retirement Savings Plan. And so that is still a very good tool for long-term savings for saving for retirement, as the name implies. It tends to be better for people with higher incomes because it allows you to deduct your whatever contributions you make from your income, so your taxable income is decreased. So that's one of the key benefits. That's one of the key advantages of the RRSP. But at the same time, it also means that for people with lower incomes, there's less of an advantage there. So, again, without making the rule too specific, you're usually looking at people with incomes of, let's say, $60,000 or even more than that to make the RSP more beneficial. And so that's the RSP. Again, there's a whole set of other rules that I won't go into right now. The TFSA, tax-free savings account, that's newer. That was introduced in 2009. That has more flexibility in the sense that with the RSP, when you take money out before a certain age, you'll face taxes and certain fines. Because, again, we're jumping around here. The government has that vehicle so that people really use it. And again, I'll come back to the word disciplined, to use it when they retire. So that's kind of the drawback, is that many people start with an RSP thinking, okay, yes, I'm all in. I'm ready to keep investing until my retirement. But then something comes up and they say, well, I'd really like that money. Mm-hmm. And then unfortunately they make a withdrawal and they'll face taxes and penalties, as I say, because they're withdrawing sooner than they're supposed to. With the TFSA, the tax-free savings account, you have greater flexibility there, and you can withdraw that money sooner, assuming you've accumulated a certain amount over a period of time. There's no, let's say, you can do it at any age, and the money is not taxable. Exactly. So again, you have to be careful about how much you contribute. There are limits to how much you can contribute in any given year. And if you withdraw, there's also rules as to when you can contribute again.
Again, exactly.
So that's the TFSA. And you mentioned also
the RIF.
The RIF. Well, the RIF is just for people who have an RRSP at a certain age, basically at 71, they more or less have to convert their RRSP to a RIF.
Yes.
RIF, which stands for Registered Retirement Income Fund. So at that point, the first year, if you haven't converted earlier, you can convert at an earlier age than 71, but you have to convert by age 71, and you have to start taking withdrawals from your RIF by age 72. So again, if you have an RSP and if you've accumulated a certain amount, by age 71, 72, whether you're retired or not, some people continue working, they still have to convert to a RIF, and they'll still have to make withdrawals, as I said, by age 72.
Okay, so it's more so an age thing for the RIF, correct?
Yes, correct.
There's more of a focus on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. And would you like to touch on the FHSA, which is fairly new?
Yeah, that's a newer vehicle, and as the name implies, first home savings account. So it's really for people who don't own a home yet, but would like to. And that was basically introduced because these days I think there's a lot in the news about how it's difficult for people to buy properties, to buy a home, whether that's a
economic crisis right now that we're in, especially for my Gen Z generation.
So this vehicle was introduced by the government to make it easier for people to save for that type of purchase. Again, there's a whole set of rules associated with them, and in terms of how much you're able to contribute.
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a cap of $40,000
right.
for the specific registered account.
For the lifetime.
For the lifetime, exactly.
But per year, I believe it's $8,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's very different from the TFSA.
It's very different from the TFSA, and as probably more qualities related to an RRSP, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
And so remains to be seen how many Canadians take advantage of that, because as I say, it's a new product. Some of the advantages are that you can make shifts between your RRSP and your FHSA, excuse me. But again, there are some strict rules as how much you can shift from one account to the other. So that's something you definitely want to be clear on.
Yeah. And get the proper benefits from them too. I think here, when we talk about these investment accounts, we're also creating awareness in how to properly use them. You know, there are so many things available to us, and sometimes there is, yes, a lack of information at times, but sometimes there's also an overload of information. Where do you go? Where do you start? What do you do? And therefore, that's why mentioning what the benefits or maybe also the disadvantages are what's important for different profiles and where you are in life. So I think what we can now talk about, which is also an interesting part of how to properly use these accounts too, are the age myths or myths in general about investing. One of my favorite, as we've been discussing, is I'm too young, I can wait.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I've been stressing, when you're, once you're, let's say, out of school, if you're working full time, and even if you're not necessarily making a huge salary, most entry-level positions probably, people when they start to work are making, lower levels of income. But that's okay because, I mean, once you're age 18, you can open a TFSA, for example.
In a way, yeah.
That's the age where you're allowed to start one as a Canadian resident. And so even then, so for 2024, the contribution limit was $7,000 or is $7,000. But that doesn't mean you have to contribute $7,000.
Exactly.
You can contribute a much smaller amount.
Yeah.
And again, you talk about, the miracle of compounding, if you will. So even if you're contributing, whether you want to do it per month, per quarter, per year, but even amounts of, $1,000 per year, you know, and if you invest wisely, of course, that's a slightly different topic, but if you invest wisely, over time, these can make a big difference and can lead to, you know, a very nice accumulation of wealth.
Absolutely.
So again, the ingredients are, you know, discipline, persistence, in terms of, you know, investing even small amounts on a regular basis, whatever you know, period is more convenient for you. Investing that money wisely, and so these are, let's say, the ingredients for a good recipe to build wealth over time.
There you go. I think for me here, again, going back to my parents, that feeling of insecurity made me think that investing was only for experts, and I had no game or play in trying to do so. So I didn't start at 18. I started at close to 21, 22. And when I was 18, I had a regular job at McDonald's. That was my first job. Okay. Those were my first paychecks.
I don't think that's so unusual.
And yeah, that's definitely not unusual. And, you know, 21, 22-year-olds also still work at McDonald's nowadays. So this is just a point to make here that even if you have a small paycheck of $250 and you're living with your parents still, just $20 does the cut. Choose research on a stock that, you know, has good dividends or a higher yield, and $20 is a good way to start. So for me, I'm always advising younger people than me to, you know, do that research, get your first job, get that first paycheck, and do what you have to do. There are so many private business accounts that are for Canadians now that are available, and you just have to sign up and open that TFSA account and pretty much start that contribution. Like you said, yes, it could sound big when you say $7,000 for an 18-year-old. Mm-hmm. Like, man, I do not have that type of money. Yeah. I do not have that type of money. But here, this is just how big your pool is. And as you grow older, that investment room only gets larger, right? So let's talk about low risk investments. Like we're saying here, an 18-year-old who has his first paycheck or his or her first paycheck and doesn't know what to do with that first $20. What should they start doing?
Well, lower risk, again, we can have a very long discussion about that. But I mean, a younger person has what I like to call a lot of racetrack.
Yeah.
So, you know, in the investment business, we assume you're going to live till 80, 90, or even older.
Yes, fingers
crossed. So that
crossed.
means if you're retiring at 65 or maybe even later, you're still probably going to be living for many, many years mm-hmm. beyond the time when you've stopped working. So you want to be in a position where, however long that period of time is, you've accumulated enough wealth you know, in your working years that allows you to live comfortably, and assuming you're in good health and so forth, reasonable health, mm-hmm. To 80 or 90 or whatever the case may be. People are living longer after all. And so when you're younger, you have the racetrack to invest in riskier assets. Mm-hmm. So what are riskier assets? That's generally stocks or funds that invest in stocks.
Yeah.
Because with stocks come greater volatility. But that's okay because when you're younger, you can withstand the shocks. So when the pandemic, when COVID first hit, there was a period when the market saw a very sharp decline.
It did.
I believe in early 2020.
Yes, March 2020, yeah.
But guess what? It wasn't long before that where the market recovered
very well
right away, quite sharply, and hit new highs that even, you know, higher than where it was prior to, you know, COVID, the pandemic, you know, the onset of that. So that tends to happen every once in a while in the market. Yeah. And so, but again, younger people can ride that out. If you're, you know, this goes into issues like tolerance for risk. If you're a person who doesn't sleep well at night because of what might be happening in the stock market, then maybe you'll want to have less exposure to stocks and more exposure to less risky assets, which are generally bonds. So we're getting into an issue, we're getting into a subject known as asset allocation.
Yes, there you go. Your portfolio, yeah.
So that's where you decide on your shift or your asset mix of your portion of stocks, bonds, and even maybe a small portion in cash. And that's very dependent on the individual because everybody will have a different risk profile, as we like to say. So there's no right answer to that question. There's no if somebody asks, so what's the right asset mix? What's the right asset allocation? Well, it depends on all kinds of factors. Your age, as we've been saying.
Salary.
Your income as well. Yes, your tolerance for risk. Your knowledge as well. How much you know about the market and how much you're aware. Well, yes, some assets are riskier, and that's just how they behave. But at a certain time, I'll be better off with stocks if I stick with it. So all that comes into play.
Absolutely. For what that's making me think of is when I first got started, it used to give me such anxiety hearing, oh, well, it depends on all of this criteria. I was like, well, give me a right answer. Like, tell me what to do. And what really helped are these YouTubers that would make lists of must-have Canadian stocks and ETFs and different things like that would be low risk and a good return over time or really good dividends. And now that I think about as well what happened in March 2020, that must have been for a lot of people like the most optimal time to start investing, right? Because the crash was so significant.
That's right.
And that's when I got started too. So I got lucky. I guess I was part of the lucky sheep of people who started investing at a time where the world stopped.
Right. I mean, one way to look at it is, stocks went on sale.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You tend to look at that with your day-to-day,
it was Black Friday.
Consumer goods that you purchase, something that you use for your meals on a regular basis.
Yeah.
If it goes on sale, yes. I mean, I don't think twice. Of course, you go and buy it. But with stocks, it should be the same. But a lot of people tend to have this kind of fear that, oh, wait a minute, the market's down. Is it going to go down more? And how much more is it going to go down? So either they hesitate because, oh, you don't buy now, the market's down and it's going to go down more. Well, if you really want to think about it, I mean, that's why that's another reason why it's better to invest over different periods of time.
There you go.
So, you're investing, it would be nice if it was a steady rise up all the time, but that's not how it works with stocks. And so if you're investing over different periods of time, you'll also manage to invest at periods when the market is down.
There you go. It's very unpredictable, and I think we have to absolutely preface this conversation, especially in talking about investments, that the market is unpredictable. You will not be able to tell where it will be the next day, the next week, ever. And sometimes minimizing that talk, because I have an application on my phone, Yahoo Finance, and sometimes you'll click on a specific stock and you'll see a lot of people kind of, oh, is it bearish? Is it bullish? Where is it going? And, that's why investing, like I said, is your tolerance of also kind of your emotions, how you look at things, are you aggressive? Or are you more reserved? How are you going to, really treat this? And patience is really key here.
You're referring to a whole branch of finance called behavioral finance.
And there you go.
And there's entire courses on that.
There you go. And that's my mix of social work in this too.
Yeah. And so very often people don't act rationally when it comes to investing. There's all kinds of specific behaviors. We won't get into them now about what people do in certain situations. And so, that can be detrimental to their
returns.
To their returns, yes, absolutely, yeah.
That's also having me think about the FIRE movement that we hear a lot of people also doing. I forget what the F stands for, unfortunately, but IRE is invest and retire early, right?
Yes.
So a lot of people who also have very high incomes, I have to preface that too, that get the chance to invest, and they invest in really high dividends, and that's what they live off of, right? These really great returns off dividends that they get monthly or quarterly, whatever that they do. That also speaks to the differences in where you choose to invest and what your goal is. People have to look at what their goals are. Are you someone who likes to work and wants to work for a longer period of time, or do you wish to have, do you wish to retire at 35 like a lot of these people in the FIRE movement? So I think in all of this, investment is also a way to take a deeper look at who we are as people individually and what we want our lives to look like. Money is a psychological thing, It's the psychology of money. Looking at your own perspective and looking at where you'd like to go or where you find yourself to be right now. Like, I was once a student. I still live with my parents. It's probably, I'm sure it's different for you, right, Sam? You have kids. I'm guessing that you are married.
I am, yes.
So you have definitely different goals, and you probably wouldn't be making the same type of investments that I was making maybe 2-3 years ago versus what you are doing right now.
Well, you touched on it in our conversation. One of the main, let's say, changes or products, if I can call it that way, that was introduced more so as I got older, that has been available for the last 10 to 20 years, but has really taken off in terms of investments, are exchange-traded funds, or ETFs.
Yes.
And that's really made it simple, if I can, or more simple, for everybody to invest.
Yes.
So you talked about investing in individual stocks. And that's fine, but as I tell my students, if you you can invest in a few stocks, you can start investing in several stocks, but the more individual stocks you have to invest in, you have to start following them, right? You have to sort of know what's going on and understand financial statements and financial results, and then make decisions on whether, well, do I still hold the stock or do I sell the stock? And that takes a lot of time.
Yes.
So now with ETFs, exchange-traded funds, what those allow you to do is invest in a really broad of the market with really just one investment. So you will have ETFs on the Canadian market, the Canadian stock market. You'll have ETFs on the U.S. stock market and international and so forth. Now there's ETFs for every different region or sector that you can think of, things that, you wouldn't have believed before, but they can be really focused on very specific areas.
Yes, different sectors. Yeah.
Different sectors. So the truth is you don't really need to buy even 10, 15, 20 ETFs. You can really get that exposure to a very broad part of the market with just a handful of different ETFs.
That's what I love about ETFs. It could focus on banks, it could focus on the oil sector, it could focus on the energy sector. It really depends, or tech, right? So it really depends. And again, do your research. The information is honestly so readily available. You just have to type something on Google and
it is available, but it's also a matter of having an understanding about it. And so if I were to suggest to people, I'd say if you can keep it to fewer, broader ETFs, that's, the better in a way. Because it means, you don't have to, and I do this for family members actually. If I'm investing for them because they know I work in the industry, I'll pick about, let's say, half a dozen different ETFs that cover either different parts of the world. Now, a lot of people, they really like that idea of picking their own stocks, as you've kind of been suggesting along the way. So that's what I like to call play money. So, and they get a certain joy, a thrill, or, it's really important for them to say, and they'll say, yeah, I know the ETFs, that's kind of my core investments, that's fine, but I need to be able to, take some of this and, have fun, so I want to be able to buy, certain stocks if I really want to buy, just Apple or Google or whatever it happens to be. Google now called Alphabet. So I don't like to deprive people of that joy. So I say, okay, and again, going back to asset allocation. So take a certain portion of that money that you've put aside for investing, however much money that is. maybe put the core of that into ETFs,
Yep.
and then leave a certain percentage just for individual stocks if that's what you really want to do. And, I mentioned some larger stocks, some larger companies that are more established and have long track records. But sometimes people like to invest in more of the speculative type of things. So, now AI is hot, artificial intelligence. Yes. So they'll find a small AI stock that has less of a track record, but somebody told them that this is the next hot thing. Mm-hmm. And so if you really want to do that, okay, fine, but don't put all your eggs in one basket, as the expression goes. So it comes back to diversification, which is a term used a lot in investment management. Yes. Mm-hmm. So with your core ETFs, you're diversifying across different markets, different sectors, all over. And with the smaller portion, you're kind of taking some bigger risks on maybe some smaller companies that may or may not work out in the long run. If they work out, great. But if they don't work out, just because your neighbor gave you a hot tip, or your hairdresser or whoever happened that to be, mm-hmm. then at least, okay, you didn't, and you, unfortunately, maybe you lost on that investment. That loss will be smaller. It won't have as large an impact on your overall portfolio, on your overall wealth, on your overall, your goals of trying to save for the long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about investing money into the market, we have to, I think, double down and look at, the time that we invest in exchanging our time for money as well. So if we're going to put this energy in, we ought to take the time to do this research. And there's also the part of trusting the decisions that we're making in the stocks that we're picking. Are we picking a stock that we're familiar with, or a bank that we personally use? I remember when I first started, I was like, what bank should I start with? And then I looked at my phone and I was like, oh, I bank with TD. Why not? Why not go and check out, their financial reports, check out different people who have invested with them for a longer time, look at conversations that are going on. So it's also a matter of, as a consumer, as people who, are part of this whole system, what are we putting our own money into with what we're buying? And do we now also decide to invest our money into the companies themselves, Walmart, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, all of these things that, day to day everybody uses.
So, again, investing in individual stocks is not an easy thing.
It's really not.
I spent a lot of my career doing that, and, I guess somewhat successfully. But the point is that not everybody has that training, that background, that knowledge, that expertise. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I advise people who don't have that background, that expertise, to kind of, to really focus on funds, whether it's mutual funds. If you really want to invest in mutual funds, they come with higher fees. Or ETFs. That's, again, we talked about ETFs already, but one of the key advantages and features that make ETFs so wonderful is the fact that their fees are so low, which is why I'm stressing that in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, to invest in individual stocks, of course, you can do well, and you over the long term, yes, people have accumulated great amounts of wealth investing in individual stocks. But again, I would say to keep that portion, and for the average person who doesn't work in the investment industry, to keep the portion they invest in individual stocks, just to put some kind of limit on that.
Absolutely.
So, if your core portfolio is going to be 80%, for example, maybe 20% will be in individual stocks. Mm-hmm. Or let's say specialized ETFs. If you really want to buy that ETF that focuses only on artificial intelligence companies because you think this is the next, this is the wave of the future, keep that portion to a minimum.
Absolutely. So here, I think the next portion too is, how do people get started? A lot of people don't know where to get started. And I think I can cover this portion in saying that for me, it was my biggest it was my biggest struggle. I was like, okay, well, I have this desire, and where do I execute this desire? Where do I put it into action? And Wealthsimple has been, for me, a great gift by Canadians for Canadians as a private investment business that allows Canadians to sign up for free. And obviously, like we discussed, right? They have to find a way to make their money. And they make their money through these different investments with different companies. So by using Wealthsimple, for me, what it helped me do was use an application that's right at the tip of your finger on your phone. Start with a minimum amount of money. Like I said, if you're 18 years old and you're making little paychecks that are looking like $250, just $20 can get you far. And like we've discussed, doing your research on different ETFs and different sectors that interest you the most is a great way to start, and has pretty much all of Canadian stocks and ETFs that are readily available for us too. And then we also have something like Questrade. Questrade focuses a little bit more on the U.S. market. And also we could talk about different high yield savings account that I've recently been doing a lot more research on in comparison to traditional banks. I think for a long time I used to look at TD as because that's what my parents, introduced me to. So I kind of put all my faith in, oh my gosh, TD. And especially as a younger kid who doesn't really know much about banks like that, you pool all your money into it. But in the same topic of diversification, having different banks is also a very good thing to do, putting your money in different banks. And I've recently gotten interested in these high yield savings accounts where they're online banks, and because they don't have any physical branches, they're allowed to pool a little bit more money into your savings. So instead of making like your traditional maybe 1%, you could yield something like 3 to 4%. Which I'm a big, big fan of, obviously, because it also attests to this whole idea of compounding interest in a way. So for me, for example, I use EQ Bank. I use Alterna Bank. And they're, unfortunately, and here in Quebec, some really great banks are not available to Quebecers and maybe are way more available to people in Ontario or different parts of Canada. But for me, the two banks that I was able to find that yielded just enough were Alterna Bank and EQ Bank.
Okay.
Do you have any sort of suggestions or personal experiences with these private investments or businesses, and as well as different banks that you also use?
So getting back to, a lot of what you said there, because I think you touched on several different subjects, several different topics. So banking is banking. And although the banks will tell you that you can invest, you can use them for investing, really it's limited.
It is.
So in terms of what you can actually invest at a bank. So all the large banks, large financial institutions here in Canada have their own investment management firms. So you mentioned TD. So of course TD will have an investment management firm. The problem there is that if you want to go the route of a financial advisor, and some of them are excellent, some of them are very good, and they can help you over time, hands-on, it's personal, and they can let you know, oh, by the way, Brigitte, did you know that, the deadline for your RSP contribution, if you happen to have one, is the end of February for 2023.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of hands-on assistance, guidance, and advice. Though very often with these advisors, the minimum amount that they'll want to take, an individual on as a client is very high.
Yes.
So, that could be, for example, $500,000. Okay, maybe some advisors will take you on with a slightly smaller amount, but very often it is larger amounts.
It's not for beginners.
Not necessarily for beginners. So that's where I think a lot of these digital platforms became more, with technology.
Popular.
And with ETFs, because they actually use ETFs for their clients. That's where they became, and I was surprised to see that there's actually several of these firms. You mentioned Wealthsimple, Questrade, but there's as many as, maybe up till 10 firms just in Canada who offer this service. And they are private businesses. And their advantage, as you mentioned, they'll be able to take on much smaller amounts. So you can start with a very small amount of money. And their fees are also much lower than working with an individual advisor.
Yep.
So that's kind of the pros. On the slightly negative side, you have to be comfortable with just, working online, basically. So when you sign up, they'll ask you several questions to try to determine your investor profile, your age, of course, how much expertise, how much knowledge you have about investing, how comfortable you are with, the volatility of the market. And then they'll determine an asset allocation for you, like, we were discussing before.
Yeah, robo-advisory.
So if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But, the interaction, there's less of this, if you have questions, probably many of them work by email.
Yeah.
So you'll send your question by email and they'll reply to you after a certain amount of time by email. And so if you're comfortable dealing with that and, you're working with one of these digital companies, the digital online companies that you think, okay, somebody else I know has worked with them and that they're very happy, they have very good experience with them, that's fine. But just, again, be aware that the hands-on advice and guidance from these is somewhat limited, certainly more limited than working with a personal advisor.
Absolutely. And I think what's been really cool to also discover when it comes to these digital platforms is, like we discussed, your robo-advisory. If you want to set like different settings and have your money be automated at a certain time, monthly, weekly, or whatever, as well as if not doing it self-directed, that you're really pulling in all your personal knowledge about what you're doing and what you're choosing into these platforms and making the decisions yourself with your own money. So that's definitely a great detail to put in when it comes to everything has it like upsides and downsides. And it's important to know what you're doing with the most amount of information that you can get. I was recently watching a video and it pretty much spoke on the contrast of this ability now of having investing right at our fingertips, in a sense that my sister, who was way older than me, just turned 40 actually yesterday, could have never had an iPhone in her hand with Wealthsimple and, being able to e-transfer her paycheck into Wealthsimple and then choose TD Bank or an ETF to buy. Whereas me, now in 2023, 2024 rather, should I say, could do that at any time, even at midnight, even at 2 a.m. So the accessibility at this current time for Gen Z and for millennials and just in general for everybody is something that's really cool, and we should really take advantage of that. I really love it because, like my parents told me, and I think that's what definitely contributed to their skepticism, was that why do I have to go directly to the bank and why do I have to have so much money to get started on something I'm not really the most informed about. Whereas me, I got the chance to get this information on YouTube. I got the chance to watch a lot of different people who look like me, who, just pretty much making sure that I didn't feel like I was making a mistake. And I think coming into something with money that we put so much time and energy into, the last thing you want to feel like you're doing is a mistake. So with these apps and with this whole digital modern way of investing money, I think it really makes it way more attractive than it ever has been.
More attractive, but also I think, it opens the door to, some maybe bad habits. Because you mentioned how easy it is to buy and sell.
And we haven't talked about crypto, and I don't think that's part of the conversation today.
No, I wasn't going to mention crypto, but I mean, so we look back at the period, when COVID hit in March 2020 or whenever the market went down as much. So read an article about the events around that time. And what happened was, a lot of people sold basically what's known as panic selling because they see the market's going down. So I don't want my assets to go down. And so they sold at the worst time because in fact, if they had just hung on and endured that ride, as we said, the market recovered very sharply not long after. So again, it comes back to, yes, just because you have the opportunity to sell right away doesn't mean you should. And those who who hung on and said, okay, well, yeah, the market's going through a rough period, but I mean, we're going to come out of this at some point, which at that time turned out to be very, very quickly, very, very soon. So you were better off by hanging on and not, giving in to that, impulse of, oh, let's say I want to unload my stocks because the market is down so sharply. And as it turned out, this article that I'm referring to, it actually showed that women were much more disciplined than men in terms of being able to ride out that storm and realizing, hey, the market's down, that's okay. It's going to recover. Mm-hmm. You don't know how soon it's going to recover, but eventually it's going to recover. And so I just found that interesting that women statistically seem to, it was an article in the Financial Times. I can find it if I have to, I guess. But just were much better off at riding out that storm, holding on, and being and showing much better habits in terms of investing as far as that.
Very interesting. I appreciate that article. Yeah. And it's true. It's true. Here again too, we talked about behavior. We talked about really taking an insightful look at who you are and your profile and what your goals are when you invest. And I think something that you've heard or that you probably say to your students as well is, if you're going to do it, just don't look at your phone. Like, let that investment sit for as long as it needs to sit. Let it marinate for 5, 10, whatever amount of time and years that it needs to, especially when you really have a good stock in your hand or a good ETF. Let it marinate. That's where the results come in play.
Yeah. So, yes, I do try to hammer that point home to my students as well. The other thing that I tell them, and I tell people in general, what I invest in stocks, somebody once said to me, only invest what you can afford to lose. Because, so no, I don't look at it that way. If I'm investing in stocks, I don't want to lose. Yeah. I invest what I know I won't need right away. So what I invest in stocks or funds, ETFs, is money that I know I won't need for 5, 10 years down the road. And knowing that, then I'll say that money that I've invested, that'll be okay. And I give the example, last summer, after years and years of my wife telling me we have to do our kitchen, I gave in. And, doing a kitchen these days is not cheap.
It's not.
It's quite expensive. And so I knew how much money, I had a good idea of how much we had to put aside to do the kitchen. So the money we needed for that was not invested in the stock market, because you can imagine if, that year I'd started and I'd put that money in the stock market, and then the summer came around when we were doing the kitchen and my wife said to me, okay, it's time. And I said, oh, sorry, but that money we invested is now 20% less than where we started. So, I mean, any money that you know that you're going to need within a year or even, slightly longer than that, that money shouldn't be put aside for the stock market, for stocks, for funds. That should be put aside in what you said, maybe a high interest savings account, so that when you know you're going to need it in a fairly small period of time, then at least you'll have maybe earned,
money on top of it,
something on that. And so again, another point that I try to instill on my students and anybody who asks me about investing in general. And so I don't lose sleep over it, because what I need for a rainy day, the money that I might need for a rainy day, that money is not invested in what I would call more long-term types of investments.
Absolutely. This is actually touching on our last point, which is the importance of an emergency fund or different savings for different things that we want to have projects on. But before we delve into that, the second to last point, before we conclude it all, is what's the best strategy? What's the best investment strategy for seniors? Again, here we really want to relate it back to seniors in the topic of this podcast as well. What do you think seniors or someone who's just about to get retired portfolio can look like? And while we discuss this, you mentioned something very interesting, which was the rule of thumb. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so this is you'll see this in quite a lot of financial literature. So for seniors that are about to retire, they want to make sure that what they've accumulated up until that time is there and available for them for those retirement years. Mm-hmm. But to act on that, or to make sure you're in that position, over time, going back to what we discussed about asset allocation. So over time, that's not a static thing. That doesn't mean that if you start off with, you're younger, as I said, if you're younger, you're 25 years old, and so you say, okay, I'm going to have 75% of my assets in stocks and equities, another 20% in bonds, and maybe 5% in cash. So, okay, that's fine for as you start out. But as you get older, over time, that asset allocation will shift. And so and hopefully if you're investing wisely, over time your assets are growing. And so you'll shift from less stocks and more, let's say, fixed income, more bonds, which are less risky. And so by doing that, you're kind of ensuring that what you're accumulating over time is kind of invested, let's say, more conservatively. And I talked at the beginning about racetrack. Mm-hmm. So yeah, when you're 25, you have a lot of racetrack. Yes. But when you're 45 or 55, that racetrack is beginning to be shorter and shorter. That's just how it works. And so what you want is for more of what you've accumulated to be in safer, less risky assets. So the rule of thumb that you spoke about is kind of 100 minus your age. Yeah. So if you're 25, you'll have 75% of your assets in stocks, 25% of your assets maybe in bonds. And you see how as you get older, that'll shift to less stocks, more bonds. Mm-hmm. It's a rule of thumb. Again, it always goes back to an individual's, their own, position, how much wealth they have, what they're doing, how risk averse they are. There are, older people who are still very comfortable and are in a very good position financially to be able to maintain a larger weight, a larger portion of their assets in stocks.
Absolutely.
So again, it's kind of just one way to think about these things, but there's not one size fits all when it comes to that.
That's a great answer. I want to put again another emphasis on what you said earlier about don't invest money that you need, right? So make sure that if you're gonna need, I don't know, $10,000 in a set amount of time, that you're not putting more than 80% into the market. It's not going to work out well for you. So for us to conclude all of this, I really want to touch on, like I said, the importance of having an emergency fund, a rainy day, a portion of money that you'll need for whatever happens, a broken car, a new engine, a new kitchen, health issues, really, as well. Health issues is the number one cause of needing an emergency fund, because when you can't work and you can't walk to somewhere, or you just can't get out of bed, that emergency fund will be able to keep you steady for a certain time before you get to a more healthy space or able place. So for me, like I was saying again, and that you mentioned so well, is these high yield saving accounts are very good places to park money. You park your money and you leave, you turn off that engine for a while. So what can you say as well, as someone who also has a lot of experience and probably have been parking money into like specific different accounts as well?
Yeah.
For that kitchen.
So for the kitchen or whatever it happens to be. So, I mean, yes, absolutely. And the good thing these days, or let's say the silver lining of high interest rates, maybe if I could put it that way, is that now, yes, on these high interest savings account, you can get 4.5%, depending on where you invest. Sometimes on some of these types of products. Yep. So, but that's not going to last forever. Nope. We're coming out of a period where we had very high inflation for a while, going back to 2022, 2023, but inflation is starting to come down. And so, yes, interest rates are high for now, and you're still able to make high rates on these types of products, high interest savings accounts. There's even high interest ETFs.
Yes.
So you can do that, which are, returning nice nice returns. But that, as I say, that's not going to last. Those returns will come down over the next year or two. But still, when you talk about the importance of an emergency fund, yes, it's always important to have some money set aside for those things that you know are going to come up, but even more so for things that, for the surprises. So, as you say, health issues, or, it's in the middle of winter and your heating system conks out and it's got to be repaired or it's got to be replaced. That's usually a fairly expensive, yes. So you want to make sure that you have that money set aside for the things that come up. And again, that's why when you look at your overall wealth or what you have available for investing in more risky assets, okay, that's fine. But, make sure you keep, again, a certain percentage aside. Absolutely. So that when these surprises come up, you'll be prepared. You'll be in a situation to be able to deal with it.
Is there a rule to emergency funds? I think what I remembered hearing was, have something up to the next 6 months saved up. Am I correct?
Yeah, you mean 6 months salary?
Yeah, exactly. 6 months salary.
I've heard that as well, yes.
I've heard that, yeah.
So, and that's for a lot of people quite a lot of money.
Yes.
If you can put yourself in that situation, great. If not, maybe over time build up to, over time you have an emergency fund, and at the end of each month or whatever it is, you're putting a certain amount of money aside for investing. Fine. And maybe put, some of that, what you were going to invest, into the emergency fund. So over time, you build up not only what you have for investing, but also to build up your emergency fund up until a certain point, of course. And so if you can get to, as you say, and I've seen it as well, 6 months, if you can get to that level, great. It probably for some people, will take a little bit more time than others.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. This has been a very great and insightful conversation. I don't know if you have any last words that you wanted to mention, or any advices or suggestions before we close off. No,
well, I'd like to thank you as well for giving me the opportunity. I enjoyed it. I'm always happy to talk about these subjects. Mm-hmm. So, for yourself, feel free to reach out anytime, and hopefully we'll be speaking about these subjects for the future and beyond. Of course. I'll be including our social media. I think you have LinkedIn, right? Yes. And I'll also be including my social media as well, of course. Thank you so much. Again, I'm the project coordinator of Scale Up Financial Empowerment. Thank you for sitting in this beautiful conversation with Sam Oubadia. And here we are. We are closing off episode 6. Until the next time.